Call-in user 1, is that you, Linda?
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent. I'm going to rename you.
Okay.
I guess we've been doing this while when we recognize people without their video on, huh?
How could you recognize me?
Well, the call-in user that comes in a few minutes before the meeting starts is probably not a member of the public.
Okay.
All right, and just to let everyone know, I did get the live stream up and running, and we are live at the moment, and I apologize about that. I'm scared to stop it due to technical issues.
Yeah. All right, so Chair Fernandez, it looks like we're missing Zach, but everyone else is here. So whenever you're ready, I think we can get started, and hopefully Zach will join us.
I think he wasn't going to be here.
Oh, okay, thank you. Then we're all here. It looks like we're ready to go.
I think we're good. Okay. All right, I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting to order of the Asphalt Planning Commission. And if you want to do a roll call, make it all official.
Sure, thank you. Chair Fernandez.
Here.
Vice Chair Fritz.
Here.
Commissioner Kelly.
Here.
Commissioner Ottinger.
Here.
Commissioner Wilson.
Here.
Commissioner Haug.
Here.
Commissioner Lindenbush.
Here.
And Commissioner Dauch is not present.
Okay. As far as the agenda, we're going to do item 7 first, and then go to the planning director's report just from a timing issue. And before we get into approval of minutes, I'd like to ask that we take a moment of silence to pay our respects to those that have lost their lives due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and for those that have suffered or suffering due to various social injustices. So appreciate a moment of silence. Okay, thank you everyone for that. And we'll move on to the minutes of the June 9th, 2020 meeting. Does anyone have any changes or additions to the minutes?
I had a couple of comments.
Go ahead. Okay.
On page 4, as a comment after the part of the level of service reports, as Vice Chair Fritz asked if ADUs are counted and how they are categorized. I was asking if how they were counted, or if they were counted for the RENA numbers. I just thought that should be added in there and not just counting them.
Excellent. So we'll add that in for RENA purposes.
Yeah, and then on page 10, in the middle of the page, my comments, I'd like to add another bullet point because I had questioned being confused about the various definitions of storage. And we talked about potentially, fixing that at some point. I just wanted to add that back in there because I think it was definitely confusing to me. And that's all I had.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve of the minutes.
I move we approve the minutes.
That's amended.
As amended, as I amended.
Thank you.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. All right, all in favor of minute approval? Or you would, I guess, we'll do a roll call, right?
Yeah, we can do a roll call, sorry. Let's see, Commissioner Dauch is not here. Commissioner Haig,
Aye.
Commissioner Lindenbush,
Aye.
Commissioner Kelly,
Aye.
Commissioner Ottinger,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson,
Abstain.
Vice Chair Fritz,
Aye.
and Chair Fernandez.
Aye.
Okay.
Moving on to item number 4, comments from the public on items that are not on tonight's agenda. Is there anyone that would like to make a comment?
And it looks like we do have one member of the public, Laura, so I'm going to unmute you for a moment, Laura, just to see if you have any comments.
Hi, my name is Laura Dizelle. I'm 27. I grew up in Sebastopol, and now I've been living in San Francisco for the past 4.5 years. And I just wanted to, I noticed that you guys don't have anything about addressing police brutality or racial profiling in Sebastopol on the agenda. I feel like that's a very pertinent topic, and we've had issues with that in the past in Sebastopol and the greater Sonoma County. So I just wanted to make sure that there's in some way we're looking at our relationship to that. And I know that in San Francisco, what we're doing is partially defunding the police basically, and reallocating those funds into having mental health professionals who can intervene unarmed into situations and de-escalate. And I was just hoping that we could follow suit in some way. And I also wanted to comment on, basically, I'm a teacher in the city, and I hope to eventually move back to Sebastopol. And it's become so unaffordable that I feel like I won't be able to move back here. And I just wanted to know what we're doing to also continue to provide lower income housing, and make sure that we're continuing to make sure our community is at least somewhat diverse, because I've noticed, especially since I've moved away, that it's just incredibly, there's no diversity and there's no low income housing. And so I just wanted to comment on those things. And that's really all I have. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you for your comments. And regarding the agenda items, the City Council has been taking that up. Planning Commission, we would certainly have been addressing issues with affordable housing, and will continue to do so. Okay, and no other comments. I will close the public comment and ask for any statements of conflict of interest. Okay, hearing none, we are going to move on to item number 7, regular agenda, Ives Park Pathway Preliminary Design, and this will include a presentation by landscape architect firm RHAA of the preliminary design for the replacement of the main east-west pathway through Ives Park for Planning Commission review and discussion. And move to the Planning Director for a report.
Thank you, Chair Fernandez. So I will keep my comments brief so that it's really the focus is for RHAA to walk us through the proposed design. But just to set the stage, as you may recall, I think one of our last in-person meetings was to talk about park projects for the coming year. And we do have a adopted master plan for Ives Park, and there are 3 projects on that, and they are in this year's budget funding. The City Council will be doing a sort of a budget adjustment, sort of second look in the coming months. I believe they'll be scheduled for subcommittee in August, and then for council later in August and September, just to account for any economics for the overall budget. The parks budget is done through a restricted fund, though, so these aren't things that are necessarily impacted by sales tax or property tax measures. So I don't anticipate any funding changes to these, the projects that are, and they're listed on the first page. The first sort of main project is the Ives Park pathway replacement. As Chair Fernandez noted, this is the main pathway that goes from the barbecue and picnic area in the southwest corner all the way up through past the north side of the Veterans Building, Sebastopol Art Center parking lot, and connects into High Street. That pathway, the reason this project came about was actually there are areas of the pathway that are so degraded that they are presenting some safety concerns that Public Works wants to make sure that we're addressing, as well as there are ADA picnic tables on the southwest corner, but there's no ADA pathway to get there, so they're not actually accessible. So this project has seen us. The construction part of it will prioritize starting in that side and working its way eastward. But rather than just sort of pave an ADA pathway and fix what's there, it seemed like a much better option to, hey, let's have the entire pathway designed. I know with this commission, a lot of commissioners had some comments about the amount of asphalt in the park, since it's a park, and there are large swaths of that. So we did ask RHAA, who was the consultant who worked on the master plan, to do the design for us for the pathway, and that's what they'll be presenting tonight. They are at their conceptual design stage, so this is a good opportunity to have comments before they get into the detailed, grading and construction drawing part of it. We are looking at coupling this with state Prop 68, which was passed in, I believe, 2018. That funding was just finalized for the city, and I believe the original anticipated amount was about $200,000 for a community of our size. They did open it up so that more communities were eligible, and that resulted in the amount of funding going down a little bit, but we are still eligible for $177,000 and change in state dollars for that. It requires a 10% match for us, but that is a non-competitive grant, so that is in place, and we will be applying for that in late August when that window opens up. The other projects that we're looking at in the park, one is our Public Art Committee on where the pathway it runs along the north side of the Veterans parking lot. They are working on a sculpture garden, and so what's in the budget is the sculpture pads. The Public Art Committee is doing a lot of work to put together a call and do the artist call. So that's a pretty low budget item, but something that I think will have a big impact once it's in place as an entryway from High Street to the park. And then the last part is starting to look at the creek. Obviously the creek channelization and the amount of fencing around the creek are something that the master plan looked at, naturalizing and being able to remove a lot of the fencing. The first step of that is to really understand the hydrology of the flow and make sure it's, look at how the channel might be designed. And so the preliminary design of that channel and the hydrology engineering is included in the parks budget for this year. That was recommended by this body and approved by council. But as I noted, and I do want to note that we do have sort of on when we can meet again in person, an Ives Park walkthrough and a larger discussion of the master plan on the forecast. I'll be working with Chair Fernandez, and obviously the shelter-in-place orders are sort of ruling the timing for that at this time, since we do want to make sure we're keeping everybody safe and abiding by that. So the focus of this discussion will be the pathway component, realizing that there may be some interaction with some of the other components in the master plan as well. And with that, I'm happy to answer any preliminary questions or just hand it over to the landscape architect to walk you through the plan.
Okay. Any questions of planning director? Start with, we can come back to that afterwards as well. Okay.
Right.
We'll go ahead and move on to presentation.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Chelsea. I'm with RHA Landscape Architects. I'm going to share my screen, so bear with me for a moment. Okay, can everyone see the plan?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so as was mentioned, our firm RHA had worked on the master plan many moons ago, and this first step I think is a great way to start implementing some of that, but also getting rid of some of the excess paving and really just making sure there's an ADA path from the entrance on High Street all the way to your picnic area. We did a little bit of a preliminary walkthrough and just identified areas of concern. So there are a number of areas, most notably here on the entrance from High Street, and this entrance where you've got the convergence from the parking lot that did not meet accessible slopes. And so those are our two primary areas to work on regrading, but there were a number of areas where just the degradation of the paving, unevenness or cracking made it so that it was not a smooth ADA compliant surface. So this is the park as you have it. Both gray areas are paving, but the lighter hatch that you see here is paving that is slated for removal. We are hoping to avoid all of the existing trees, not having to remove any, and also potentially providing them a little bit more room so that they're happier and healthier. Right now we have about a little over 14,000 square feet of asphalt to be removed. Moving forward, the next plans you'll see have about 11,000 square feet of proposed asphalt paving, which asphalt paving is what is in the park currently and is what we would be proposing moving forward. And about a little over 3,000 new square feet of landscape area. Okay, so in this plan, you'll see there is a dark gray line that winds its way all the way from High Street to the picnic area. And we are following ADA and maintaining a less than 5% slope in all areas. I don't think we get anywhere near that, which is great. So we're able to connect to the parking lot here and keep moving, maintaining most of the grades around the existing play area and building, providing additional planting area, not necessarily to be planted, but at least just to have mulch or some other furnishing to be decided by the parks, just to eliminate some of that excess paving and make the livable space around the trees a little bit better, making space under the drip line so that those trees are naturally watering themselves. Okay, so getting into the entrance to High Street, we are doing a slight meander, maintaining a less than 5% slope. You've got an 8-foot wide walk, which meets ADA requirements, and avoiding all of the existing trees. We have maintained all of the connections to the existing bridges. And as you get through this first channel, right now there is an existing fence, and I think our plan is to propose removing this gate in place potentially for removable bollards, but this is something I think we would want to look at when we do a reconnaissance visit after things have lightened up, potentially after this meeting. Again, maintaining the grades along the existing play area so that there are no required changes to raising or lowering that and connecting to the existing bridges. We have a connection to the existing asphalt on this side, but really opening up the paving around this tree and along the creek edge here. And then ultimately meeting up with these last two crossings and over to the existing picnic area. So and Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong, that this path is what currently does not exist, this connection. And I think that's what's really crucial in getting a clean connection and an ADA accessible connection to the existing picnic area.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, and that is the end of my presentation. Doug, do you have any additional comments that you'd like to add?
Yes, hello, I'm Doug Nelson, principal at RHAA. No, the only thing I just wanted to, at the High Street end, Chelsea, if you could go back to that end. One of the other things, I believe, Carrie, correct me here, but is this the area where you're also looking at a sculpture garden?
Yes,
So
that's correct.
We've,
So
we've
yeah, this
moved
is,
we've moved the path over, in this case to the north or northwest, to leave as much of that room, much of that area as possible for that potential use. And so Chelsea, if I heard the numbers, we have about a 300 square foot reduction. Is that right in amount of paving?
I think it's 3,500.
Oh, 3,500.
Yeah.
3,000 is what I was thinking. Off by 10 times. So, okay. So, that's one of the nice things. I think, we were given the task of kind of rationalizing where we need paving. There seemed to be more paving than is needed. So we were, looking for opportunities to provide the accessible path of travel and yet remove paving where it's not needed.
right. And I'll just make a note. Alan and I have been working with the Public Art Committee on, and thank you for leaving it on the screen for a moment, on the sculpture garden, which yes, it will sort of be up between that paving and then the line of the parking lot below. So yeah, right where the hand is and there won't be pathways through the art. You can either see them from the accessible pathway that will be installed as part of this design, or it is a park, and so if you wanted to walk off path and walk around the sculptures, that's obviously also certainly allowed. The vision for the sculpture garden is that they be 4 foot by 4 foot pads, and there'll be, I think, about 10 of them or so. And Al and I did meet with the Public Art Committee right before the shelter in place started at the site, and we'd sort of spaced them out to make sure that the spacing of them to the 10 or so pads works. A couple of notes on this. Yeah, so as long as the pathway doesn't go any further south than it currently is, that's how we had done the layout, how the Public Art Committee is envisioning the layout, and so that's fine. One point where there are a couple of options at this particular location is where the pathway meets High Street. The view here shows just a single pathway connection into High Street, but the master plan and actually RHA's first version of this had sort of a half moon. And Chelsea, I'm not sure if you're able to grab that or just go to the master plan and zoom in at High Street. And so that is something that I think, design-wise, to get some input from the commission on that would be helpful, along with any other of the components the commission might be interested in.
And the only other thing I'll add is that we'll definitely be taking this plan to the park maintenance staff and, making sure that it's functional for them.
Right, and we began this with a walkthrough with Chelsea and Doug at the site with Dante Deprete, the Public Works Superintendent. And I think Chelsea, can you go to that one corner where the trucks come in at the corner of the parking lot where number 5 is on this master plan? Yeah, so right now, most of you know there's a lot of weird kind of cross fencing at this location, and there's a couple of cross slopes, one where the pathway comes in past the parking lot, and then there is also an ADA space right at the corner of that parking lot for an accessible, for someone to park there and then have an accessible route into the park. So those are a couple of the constraints that RHA is working on. But also, and then the third one being that Public Works maintenance vehicles do access the park through that particular location. What we would like to do is, eliminate some of the fencing based on Planning Commission's prior comments about the amount of fencing in the park, but also just from a visual standpoint and a good design of a park to not have so much fencing. So that's one of the things that I know RHA is going to be looking into as well. It will probably still need some sort of movable bollard because I think one of the things we do want to do is try to eliminate non-city staff from accessing the park just because it's a convenient way to drive in for their picnic.
Okay. All right, so we'll open it up to questions. I'm gonna start with a couple of them here. So for, yeah, one of the questions I think you answered as far as vehicle access, is kind of difficult to have a combination of pedestrian and vehicle, and also allow for vehicle access. So I think that's kind of one of the challenges. And I'm just wondering, I know it's probably an expense issue. As far as the black concrete, is there other options available, or is there other material that could be used, whether now or in the future, to kind of blend in more from that standpoint?
Yeah, that I think really just comes down to cost. There's definitely a lot of options, but Doug, you might have a better idea of what the price differential is.
Well, yeah, it is, the options go into various kinds of stabilized decomposed granite. I mean, there's concrete, both of which would be, more expensive. The stabilized decomposed granite, there are many different products that are used, some of which, require more maintenance. They're more difficult to maintain. I have to say, nobody likes asphalt. It's a petrochemical product, and we if we had good alternatives, I think we would definitely use them. But there are, unfortunately, at this time, there are not good alternatives that are economical and as long lasting as the asphalt. So, this comes up all the time, and we deal with this on, almost every project. And if we had a good, easy answer, we would definitely probably try and use something else. But so without raising the budget, I don't know. And it might be, I mean, it's in the neighborhood of, asphalt might be, I'm guessing now, $8 or $9, maybe even $10 a square foot, whereas some of these materials can be $20, $25 a square foot. So, it's a significant, very significant cost increase.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. We go down the line and see if any other questions. Vice Chair Fritz, do you have any questions? Is that no? Okay.
Sorry, I think
I
I think Fritz muted.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
I was just saying, if you can go to sheet L103, I had a question. So kind of down the bottom of the sheet, up against the pool building, that triangular section you've kind of carved out of there around the tree. I like that. I mean, I like getting rid of, there's a lot of asphalt there, and I like kind of opening that up around the tree. My only concern is that I'm wondering if there's just going to be a kind of de facto path kind of made from, the east side of the pool going around the north side of the pool. Yeah, right through there. And I'm wondering if you mentioned there was no kind of plan to do any additional landscaping at this point. So I'm thinking, people are just going to walk across that, and maybe this is something just to consider for the future, but either having, a significant hedge or something to discourage people, or even like a small retaining wall, because I know there's some grade changes there. So if there was like a retaining wall, or it could be a seat wall or something that would discourage people from kind of cutting through that area. That's just kind of a question / comment, I guess. I don't know if it's if you've looked at that, because I see on the master plan there is a path along there. And I think that that's kind of going to be a natural kind of desire line. So I just wondered, did you think about that as you were doing this, or is there a reason you didn't include that path, or?
I think we can take a look at that, and perhaps it doesn't need to be asphalt. It could be, you know, if it's a minor path and we don't need vehicles on it, it could be something other than asphalt.
Mhm.
Gravel, you know, just gravel, decomposed
Yeah.
granite, something like that.
Okay,
That's
any
one
other,
question I had.
go ahead. Okay, Commissioner Kelly.
I don't have any questions. I like what I'm seeing.
Okay, Commissioner Wilson.
Yeah, I like the reducing the amount of asphalt. Carrie, I didn't understand what you wanted input from us on at the High Street entrance, though.
Well, so there's in effect two different designs. One is the more simple, what Chelsea's pointing to right now, where it just simply connects into High Street. And of course, there is a lot of slope on High Street, so this is definitely something that they'll be checking out to make sure they can make the cross slopes and everything work as it connects in. The master plan had sort of a half moon design, so they caught people from both the south and the north. And you know, it almost looks like there's sort of an entry sign in the middle of that half moon kind of circle, right as you enter the park. That probably I imagine was before the wayfinding signage, which is now in the park, which is much more of a vertical element. But you know, there's a little sort of trellis feature, and it looks like there's a bench there. Well, now we're going to have a sculpture garden. So I guess the point of, you know, do you want this to be sort of this more grand entryway, or is the more simple path preferred? And you know, knowing that I wasn't here when the master plan was done, I know we have a couple of commissioners who were. If there's a desire for a larger kind of grand entry like this or not.
Okay.
Okay, Commissioner Wilson, do you have any other comments or questions?
I do not. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Altinger.
Yes, I have 3 issues right now regarding the pathway at High Street. I think one concern certainly is that there's a tendency to cut the corner as you're entering in from either direction. So if the path isn't wide enough as the half circle was, there may be issues with maintenance there unless there's landscaping to prevent people from cutting diagonally into the park. And I think that the half circle plan solves that problem a little bit. So I am concerned that it's not a little wider or angled in each direction to avoid the cutting of the corner as people enter. So that's my comment there. Going back to what Paul Fritz was talking about by the northeast corner of the pool, I'm not really sure. I can see if you're coming around the pool from the south to the north and then turn left, it looks like there's some stairs there, and then the path that goes no place except what I call a bow tie corner on the left. Is that where people would walk? Yeah, where your hand is going, then they come to this little point that isn't really paved, where it attaches to the asphalt. Perhaps you could address that maybe right now.
Yeah, I think this area is another area that unfortunately we don't have clear photos of, and something we'd want to take another look at once we visit on site. Whether or not the path, my assumption was that this was some sort of maintenance entrance, but you all, of course, know the park way better than we do. And if this is a path that goes nowhere, then we might propose removing it in favor of something that's more pedestrian friendly around the side here.
Yeah, my concern is that it comes to a point where it looks like asphalt and the original not removed concrete come together. So yeah, right there, that point seems like it, just making it more like a path would help. So, and then my third area was on the west corner. I think it's the enlargement 3 that you were showing before by the pad where So if you're from the ADA pad and you're walking, I guess, northeast, I'm wondering how wide that path is. It looks narrower than the one at the entrance.
That is a great question. It is likely at least 5 feet. I apologize that it's not labeled. That is an error on our part. No paths are smaller than 5 feet, but
Okay,
let me
that's
see if
fine.
I can.
That's fine. I was counting the squares and thinking it might have been 4 feet, which I thought would be a little bit narrow, since when you're at an event there, should we be so lucky to have the ability to go to events there, a lot of people use that as passageway in and out, and it can get quite crowded. But I think if it's 5 feet, that's sufficient for people to go single file in 2 directions.
Okay, and I
along.
think it is the same for any of these other thinner paths. And if there's a desire to make those larger, just let us know.
Yeah, no, I think for now in the short term, because eventually there won't be a path there, but for now, I think that as long as it's 5 feet, that will be fine.
Any other comments or questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just wondering if I didn't see really any plans for lights to accompany the new pathway. And I know that that is definitely a concern that comes up a lot with residents. I've heard a lot of people talk about not feeling safe walking through the park at night because it's really dim. And I also think that lights would be really important, especially as we're moving toward a creek naturalization, to make sure that, you know, yes, we want to get rid of the fence, but if we do get rid of it, we want to make sure that nobody falls in either. And so I would just like to hear if there are any lights that have been considered. I definitely would want to see as soon as possible as we move forward with this more photographs, because I think it's really hard to say what should be prioritized, especially as we're going into a bit of a budget crunch and we're not going to be able to realize everything in the master plan right away. And I think making those tough choices is going to have to do with really having a clear understanding of where the most pressing safety concerns are and where we should be focusing all of our attention. And the last thing is I just wanted to bring up, I think it's good to be thinking about the broader issue of connectivity, especially as we're looking at what aspects of the master plan might be implemented. I think that especially like improvement number 25, converting the turning lane into parkland, if you know, the pathway doesn't connect to that, then that's definitely a consideration on the southwest corner there, which is not currently park. But that, and just my last point is I think we need to also be thinking about connectivity in the broader sense of how Ives connects to the rest of our town. So I don't know if we should necessarily be putting all of our energy into the creek naturalization and that pathway being the grand entrance, if that's what we're going to be looking for, when the Joe Rodota Trail more naturally sort of spills out at Willow Street. And that might be more of a pressing area in terms of safety, especially with the condition of Willow Street on that last block before it hits 116, the western portion of 116. I think we should be looking at that as well. So any responses you have to that, I would appreciate, but otherwise those are just some general concerns and I appreciate the report.
Yeah, lighting unfortunately is not part of our scope. Carrie, I don't know if you want to comment on the additional items.
Sorry, yeah, so so generally our parks are sort of a dawn to dusk kind of usage. I do know that there are a couple of light standards, or there are a couple of actually, it's up close to where the sculpture garden is. Along that pathway on actually the other side, the north side of the pathway, there are a couple of places where there are electrical conduits included in, and that I know Dante knows, our public works superintendent, sorry, is where used to be electrical. And so he does want those maintained, so that any future, so that there could potentially be future lighting standards there. And I believe this is also being designed so that there are some, basically some chases underneath the pathway. They go across the pathway that would accommodate some future, and Chelsea, I don't know, is it just irrigation or is there conduit will we have the ability to place some conduit under for irrigation as well as electrical in case we sort of want to future-proof it for future lighting?
Yeah, it
Because
would
you're
not
right, it's
be-
not in the budget right now. So.
Right, it wouldn't be a problem for us to add them, and we can coordinate with Dante to see where those will be most helpful.
Right. Obviously, at Ives Pool, if we can mount it to the building, that's an easier way of getting electrical for that particular area. But yeah, in the other parts of the park that aren't lit by either the ball field lights or when they're on, that's a sort of a different area lighting. That's a good point to think about how we might in the future be able to integrate those.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Hogg?
Yeah, I have a few different thoughts and questions. My first question is that when the asphalt is laid down, is there any sort of border that goes along it to make it look more formal and finished off? Like currently the asphalt just kind of spills over like a blob.
Yeah, I think our approach right now would be a refined blob, but Doug, I don't know if you want to speak to any alternatives there might be for edging. Again, that I think it generally comes down to a cost issue. There are finishes, but
Well, typically, I mean, sometimes we do put a steel edge or something like that, but that again, that's it's an expense. But this would have, I mean, this, ideally this would have a sharp edge that would be beveled and then, blend with the landscape. So what you want to avoid is you want to avoid unraveling on the edge. And, that can happen where you have a downslope adjacent to the asphalt. I don't think we have too many conditions. We'll look at that, but we'll try and avoid that condition where we, the path can get undermined by erosion. But it's generally, it's mostly flat, except we'll look at where we come close to the creek and just where the grade begins. But, once the edge, if it's maintained well, and the other issue is that vehicles driving off the edge, cause breakage. So, ideally with good maintenance and careful maintenance truck driving, the edge should be intact, really for a long time, years.
Okay, and then my other question was, so we're kind of building this ADA pathway, on the Willow Jewel Street side of things. And I was kind of walking, I went to Ives Park this morning and I was walking and I noticed that once again, the crosswalk at Willow Street and Jewel is very inaccessible. And I'm wondering if there's a way to connect that new ADA pathway with Willow Street and make a safer crossing. And if you're, I know Commissioner Lindenbush just mentioned, usurping that turn lane and making, but that whole area there is, I really think needs to be looked at, especially if we're trying to make that side of the park more ADA compliant. And also, I would invite people to revisit that asphalt as well. That doesn't look like it's going to be removed or repaved, because when I was walking on it, it didn't seem like it was in the best shape. So I don't know if that is, I would just encourage like re-looking at that to make sure if we're going to do this other pathway that we don't have this section that's actually needs work as well.
is my cursor in the right area? For the...
Yes, your cursor's in the right area. And so you can see, like, if you follow that pathway down, that area is like, when I was looking at this morning, it didn't seem to me like it was in top condition, I would say. And then also if you go to the left or towards the ADA picnic area, I would just really invite you to look at that and then just see how it's connecting to the crosswalks there. Because, you know, for a person in a wheelchair or using a walker, you know, are they going to be able to access that from Willow Street or even cross the street safely, you know?
And I think, Carrie, feel free to jump in, but, you know, what we were told, our sort of scope is that this was a phase 1 project, and, you know, that there are other parts of the park that, you know, will be addressed. And that in particular is one that, you know, was not supposed to be part of this phase 1 project. But, you know, I think we're definitely, you know, Carrie can address if that's something that, you know, is a priority, you know, if that needs to be looked at further.
Sure, and yeah, thank you, Doug. So this did start off as a, hey, there's a section of pathway that isn't accessible that goes to ADA picnic tables, and is also, there are some areas down in that southwest area that are degrading significantly to where they become trip hazards. And, you know, instead, like I noted earlier, instead of just repaving it, we wanted to have the larger vision of, hey, let's do something that's going to be consistent with the master plan. But to address your question about that sort of that whole corner of the park, Chelsea, can you go to the master plan diagram? I think that, you know, the larger diagram for it does look at that whole sort of turn lane where number 25 is. That's actually where that right turn is, and there's that sort of weird island. The larger vision of the master plan is to basically take over that turn lane and extend the park out to a corner, which obviously anytime you shorten crosswalks or, you know, make streets smaller and there's less to cross, that inherently makes it safer and easier for pedestrians of all kinds. And so, yeah, we don't have that in our in our 5-year capital improvement plan right now. It would be helpful maybe to take a few moments after public comment when we get into some deliberations on this to hear from commissioners in terms of, you know, it's maybe a little off topic for RHAA, but it would still be helpful for me to guide their work, even on this component, in terms of knowing sort of if there are other pieces like that portion that Kate just mentioned, that would be better or you know, items that you feel should be prioritized as we do sort of the future planning for the future steps.
I also think that we should make note of, you know, areas or as a whole there's a lot of events that happen there, and how does that tie in either with fencing off sections or, you know, how that flows in there. So I think it may be good to confer with some of those organizations that do those events, and maybe they may have some useful suggestions that we might be able to integrate. At this point, how is, if someone wants to drive, the public wants to drive a vehicle in there, is that regulated at all, or is that just kept open? How is that handled?
People are not supposed to drive into the park. It's not that kind of a park. I personally have never driven in the park. I've always parked on Jewel usually, or in the veterans parking lot. But you can access them over at, where number 5 is. And that's not terribly well locked off. That's that northwest corner of the, thank you, Chelsea, for pointing with the cursor, the northwest corner of the Veterans Building parking lot. One of the things that we've asked RHA to do, because, you know, Public Works does need to get in there with their vehicles. They usually go in, you know, early morning-ish on weekdays when usage is fairly light, or, you know, after an event like the Apple Blossom or the Peacetown concerts the next day to do the cleanup. The problem is that that vehicle entry is not terribly secure, so it's really easy for just anyone to drive in. And we've had a lot of people with who, yeah, will just drive in because it's easy. So one of the things that I'd like to make sure we do with this is get a sorry, I'm getting distracted by the pictures a little bit. Make sure that we get a gate that is easy for Public Works to use, but keeps other people out. And that will in itself help with the degradation of the asphalt, as Doug mentioned, but also just help, with park safety. You don't really want private vehicles driving on the same path as a pedestrian or bicycle might be using.
Yeah, and I think also number 15, the entrance from Willow Street seems to be often used for events. You can enlarge that, yeah, right in there for drop-offs and that kind of thing. I think there's usually a chain or something across there, I believe, and some signage. So that's another one to take a look at. If there's no, go ahead. If there's no other comments, I'm going to open it up for any public comment on any of this information we talked about. Okay, doesn't seem like we do. So I'll bring it back in. Is there a particular information or comments that you're looking, Carrie, from the commission as far as the to move forward, or is it just basically some of the comments that we already made?
I think the type of comments that you've been making have been helpful for me in terms of areas to look at a little bit more closely as the design moves forward. So if there are additional comments, again, comments on the east entry, I think what Commissioner Ottinger noted is actually, it's a good point, and to make sure that if we do keep it, look at where the natural pathways are and how it might align, whether it's a half moon or, two pathways coming in, one from each angle, as generally happens, or the straight path like this. But yeah, you are all avid park users. So just from your experience, how you think this works, as your comments are great.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I support the half moon as well if you're looking for feedback, just because I feel like with Ives Park in my mind, it's kind of like a city promenade park. And I feel like all the entrances could be, a little bit more significant and a little bit more welcoming, people walking through the park and, strolling. And I feel that in general, in our Sebastopol, we need better park entrances. And as Commissioner Lindenbush said, also to make this feeling of being connected to the city street, part of that connection is the entrance itself. It's like a welcoming signal or sign. So I feel that once again, like thinking about the entrances is actually very important part of the concept and overall usability. And so when Chair Fernandez was talking about the Willow Street entrance, that entrance, once again, if you were going to consider looking at that asphalt up there, you might also think about the entrance, like if there's a half moon on High Street, maybe you'd put a half moon there or something, keep the design elements cohesive and visually coherent.
Okay.
I'd like to just sort of weigh in a little bit on the half moon idea. I mean, I'm not necessarily opposed to the half moon. I think there's going to be some physical limitations on it. If you go to that sheet, there's a tree that's right there. And I think there is a bit of there's no grades noted, but there is a bit of a grade drop off where that tree is. That tree is a bit higher than where you're showing the path. So I think it might be a little tricky to get a larger element in there, and maybe something that I think was also on the master plan, but as a way of sort of emphasizing the entrance or celebrating the entrance to the park is, with a trellis or some kind of structure over the pathway that kind of really draws your attention and highlights it. I just think from a physical standpoint, it might be difficult to get that kind of half moon design in there with that existing tree and the grades that are happening.
And Commissioner Fritz, I think you'd also mentioned items 21 and 11, which is the north side of the Little League field, as far as having access to that. On that, I'm not sure. Yeah, right in there. Is that pavement there, or that's just grass area, isn't it?
Now there's no path there. Now it's
okay.
There's nothing there.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
And I, just to weigh in on the corner of Willow and Jewel, personally, I think that's it's a really important item for the city to consider funding that in some capacity, even if it's just putting some kind of temporary, concrete planters or something to block that intersection off, because it is a horrible intersection to cross.
Yeah,
I mean, I used to walk my dog through there all the time, and there's just no safe way to get across there. So even if it's just buying some large concrete planters for temporary purposes, and it is a hazard, I think, and I'm in favor of trying to, if not fully implementing the vision of this plan right away, doing something as an intermediate step that would be somewhat cost effective, but really improve the safety of that intersection, because it is pretty dicey.
Yeah, it is a challenging, because you're not really sure like where the car's coming from. There's like 3 or 4 different directions. So yeah, that's a good point. And
they can't see you very well. You're kind of stepping off that curb and just kind of hoping that someone sees you, because people really whip around that corner. And that, that tree that's there could be integrated more. It's almost like it's just kind of sitting there. Yeah. I think it could be used to integrate a little bit better. Yeah, it's very strange.
I have just one more comment, and on the master plan, it's area 6, and it was that area that we've been looking at a little bit more closely on site enlargement 2 or 1 of 3. It's right, yeah. So those are currently restrooms right there, and I just can't tell with the existing plan if the removal of paving that would impact access to the restroom, because I think it's the women's room that's closest to that side. So where you guys have planting, I think the restroom entrance is like right around in there. There's a men's are on one side and ladies are on the other. So
right, and there's a drinking fountain. There's a drinking fountain in that area as well, I believe.
Yeah, so just thinking about access, like especially ADA access to the bathrooms, that's my only comment.
I think that's something we will field verify in the coming weeks. We definitely want to make sure there's access to the restrooms and water. We just want to know where they are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the doors, it kind of goes in and you go left, right, whatever. But anyway, that's something just to consider. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks for the note.
Okay. If there's anything else, I think we got all the information that you're looking for.
I see Kathy's hand up, Chair Fernandez.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, am I on?
Yep.
I think the master plan has the bathrooms in another location eventually, over closer to where the ball fields are. I believe they're over there somewhere. They might be in that snack bar area. I'm not sure, but I think
number
I
13.
remember reading about that. But yeah, the bathrooms would be a problem, and when you're actually looking at the site, you'll see that people do tend to cluster and mill there in lines. So accommodating a lot of people there is important. And then since I'm talking, going back to the east entrance, I agree that this semicircle isn't necessarily my preferred option. I just wanted to make sure that the angle is good enough that people aren't just cutting across landscaping. Maybe landscaping can avoid that, but just cutting across the grass seems useless. Oh, and one more thing, regarding the Willow and Jewel corner, the city did a fairly recent study. I just can't remember how many years ago it was, and looked at the traffic situation, which seems really scary, but I don't think it had really bad marks, and cost and some options for that corner. So if anyone's interested, Carrie could probably find that for them. But it was looked into very closely, and it is quite an expensive change since it doesn't have a lot of traffic hazard problems there.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
I had a few more comments on the Southwest, since we were talking about it. So when I was in high school, I went to Annalee in Sebastopol. For every single last day of school actually was centered around an island, as in tiki themed island party that took place on the island, as in the traffic island at Willow and Jewel. And it was really, really popular. The first year there were probably about 60 people that attended. And I think the first year was my freshman year at Annalee. And then by my senior year, it had gotten so popular that it was hundreds of students on the last day of school overflowing from the island. So that was, aside from the Apple Blossom Festival, the most used part of the park in my experience of it growing up here. So I think it would be great to consider how we can bridge that with some of the opportunities that we have in that corner, and not just prioritizing it to be what it's fully realized as in the master plan, which I think is a really great plan. But I think we should look at some of the opportunities like Commissioner Fritz brought up with putting up some bollards and giving that space for people to, take their food to go and do some alfresco dining. I think it would be really important to consider how we can improve and expand some plaza space right now with social distancing. But even beyond that, I think it just is a really promising site because, if we just did something extremely low cost in the interim that was CEQA exempt, like putting some paint on it and just allowing people a space to distally congregate, I think it would do a lot for our community. And I think it would also be able to generate further interest in Ives Park. So I know that is a lot to be thinking about for sure, and it's not necessarily in relation to where the pathways come out. But I think looking at some of that CEQA exemption, potentially securing funding through, I know the city has been wanting to develop a Parks Foundation for a long time, do some sort of public-private partnership there. I just think it would really be a great way to galvanize the support of the community and the action of the community to really shepherd this plan forward, because we're not just going to be able to do it as a commission or consultants or staff. It's really going to take our community to continue to have interest in this project and move it forward. So I'm really grateful for all of what RHAA and the city have been doing to work on Ives Park, because I know it's just a really important jewel for not just our community and connectivity to the downtown, but also a lot of the sentimental reasons why people care about this town. And I think it'd be great to have some really immediate term solutions in place for allowing people more space to congregate when this pandemic really does slow down and we have more ability and space to congregate. So thank you again.
All right, well, go ahead. All right, well, thank you to the presenters. Appreciate your time and input, and we'll just, I guess, continue on with this plan that's taken a while, little by little, but at least we're moving in some direction. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, we'll be moving to the item number 6 now, Planning Director's Report.
Thank you, Chair Fernandez. So it's, first I want to thank you, whether you knew it or not. We gave up our July 23rd meeting. It turns out our development impact fee study is taking a little bit longer than anticipated to get the numbers right and in a way that will be a good discussion for this group. But in that, we gave up the July 23rd meeting to the City Council. They did have 2 special meetings to talk about police use of force and funding issues. That was the July 23rd, and then they also met the next Tuesday on July 30th. One of the things, there are a few items that came out of that. One was there is a sort of youth group of activists who've been pretty involved in the city, and they had asked if they could do a mural or graphic, visual graphic associated with the Black Lives Matter movement. And at their July 30th meeting, the city council did give them the go ahead to do that at the plaza area, Weeks Way. Actually, I don't think a location was specified. They had requested that the Public Art Committee assist the youth with this. And so we did hold a special public art meeting the next week on July 6th, I believe, to discuss that with that group. And there is a concept that was then presented to council the next night. So to do a, and I can probably pull up the graphic if you'd like to see, but a sort of graphic Black Lives Matter on the southwest portion of the Mario Savio Free Speech Plaza, the downtown plaza, and then have multicolored handprints all around that. And so that has been approved by council and will be going forward. The youth group is doing most of the organizing and design for it. They have a liaison from our Public Art Committee. The chair is working with them. She is a graphic designer and helping quite a bit. So that project is moving forward. And a couple of the things that are going to council in the next couple of weeks of interest to this group. We are bringing a vacation rental moratorium extension to them this next Tuesday. And otherwise the extension would expire beginning of August. And I have been, we have just heard back that we did get the, and actually we just got the contract for the SB2 state planning grant funding, which will cover the cost of a consultant for that. I had a good discussion with the consultant on Monday. He, after hiatus from COVID-19, he is back in his office and working again. And we're finalizing a contract for that. So I anticipate that we will have some public meetings, both with the short-term rental owners, operators, as well as the general public, and then also with the commission starting in August. So that's going to council on July 21st, but then also for the extension of the moratorium, but then we're going to be following up fairly shortly with discussions with this group to try to wrap up those policy revisions. Another item that regarding the use of tobacco in smoke shops related to the use permit that this commission heard a couple meetings ago, that group of many of whom attended and had public comments for this body has been meeting, and I attended a meeting with them yesterday. Today's Tuesday, so yesterday afternoon. They will be bringing a tobacco retail license ordinance to council on August 4th. And that will probably require a ordinance revision of our zoning ordinance, because it will limit both the number, as proposed, it would limit the number of retailers allowed, and also have more restrictions on significant retailers, which are sort of smoke shop only purveyors, as opposed to, you know, a drugstore that happens to sell or a grocery store that happens to sell cigarettes or tobacco products. That will be going to the council on August 4th. They do not have things like kratom in it. I know that was of an interest of how to clarify that for this group, but that group is focused on tobacco-free Sonoma County and tobacco use. So it's sort of written towards that at this time. And then one other item of interest for one of the projects you approved last year or the year before last year, I think, the Davis Townhomes, the 18-unit townhome project just at the end of south end of Moore Street and Sebastopol Avenue. As many of you know, I think I had reported previously that that project was sold to a new owner, Stephen Wright, the Wright family. They own Wright Construction, and we just had a pre-construction meeting with them on the site this morning. They are about to pull their building permit and start construction on that project. So always nice to see projects that we've approved and for much needed housing moving forward, especially during this time. So.
And where exactly, could you be more specific on where is that?
Sure. So that is behind the Benjamin Moore Paint Store and west of Park Village, Tamagotchi Park. And then it's actually right behind, just south of the other neighbors are the bike path that connects to the trail. And the Airbnb, or sorry, the bed and breakfast that this group approved at that historic house on the corner.
And then against the railroad forest, right?
Yes, yes, exactly. And yeah, so if you recall, your conditions required them to take out the invasives in that area and replant it with natives and maintain that 50-foot buffer, environmental buffer for that at the south side that connects to the railroad forest property.
Okay.
And I think that's it. There's been a lot going on in the city, so I am happy to try to answer questions that you might have.
Yeah, we also liaison Commissioner Lindenbush. I believe you may have some comments on the council meeting as well, right?
Yes, please.
So I did sit through, I think, probably 11 hours of the council meeting. Just because I think, the Mayor Slater said at one point in the meetings that he thought it was the most important issue that the city's faced in his tenure, and possibly in the tenure of any council members. So I think, the community coming together on this issue is highly illustrative of some of the concerns that people have and how it's going to shape what we're looking at moving forward. So I just mostly wanted to say, I think that part of what came about in a lot of those meetings and those discussions was a process of looking really at the process of budget formation and how money gets spent in the city. That was something that was really recurring, was people either concerned about Sebastopol spending 46% of its budget on the police department, which is, I believe, the highest share of any municipality in Sonoma County. And another sort of extent of the comments was that the police department didn't necessarily have really concrete data to present when looking at sort of an audit or how money is spent within the department. And so a lot of the other questions that were kind of raised were people asking, how really is the budget process formed in Sebastopol? And I think something for all of us to consider might just be, opening that up in a way, because it only really has two very senior staff members and select members of the council. But ultimately, I think that we don't maybe talk about the budget as much as we should. I didn't necessarily know going into those meetings that most of the budget wasn't really changing from the past year, aside from a cost of living increase, although, we've talked about it very briefly here. But I think just making sure that we're engaging all of the commissions and all the committees of the city to have a really strong and robust and collaborative process for the budget is very important. And that was the most overarching thing that I heard out of all the comments. Of course, there's a wide range of very healthy and diverse opinion in our city, and that's something that we welcome and we support. I think we just want to make sure that we don't just have we don't just have an outspoken public, but we have an engaged public. So that's pretty much my broad gloss from looking over all the June meetings, and I think that Director Svanstrom's report is overall really informative and complete.
Okay. Questions of either one from the commission?
Linda here. I think you have to unmute me.
We can hear you, Linda.
Oh, good, great. Okay, regarding the tobacco retail ordinance, I had two questions. One is tobacco and vaping, nicotine are two different things. It's going to be included in there? And then the second question is it coming to the Planning Commission? I don't think I heard that.
So it will not be coming to the Planning Commission. It's a chapter 7 or chapter 8 of our municipal code. So it will not be coming. I think it may have an impact on allowed uses. So that part of it, if it's adopted, we want to make sure our zoning ordinance is consistent. So that part would then come to the Planning Commission. But the regulation of sales of nicotine does not need to come to the Planning Commission. And so they're trying to get that to the council on August 4th. And your first question was if vaping, so I know that all nicotine products are included in that.
Okay.
I would actually be happy to send you the draft of the ordinance if you, as it stands right now. I know it's not final yet, but from the discussion we had yesterday, if you're interested in seeing that, Linda.
Yeah, thank you.
I will do that.
Okay, other questions or comments?
I have a couple questions. It's Kate Haug. Carrie, I was just wondering, I think that this will be included in the discussion of vacation rentals, but I still feel very strongly that ADUs are supposed to be built for housing stock for residents and not as tourist accommodations, especially given the comments made by Laura Dazelle and others. I feel like we really need to boost our housing inventory for residents. So I would just really hope that we could discuss this further in the future, given that we need more residents for volunteer fire department, for our schools. We need more diversity in housing to lower housing prices. But it sounds like that's on the books.
Yes, that will be part of that discussion. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and then I was just wondering if somebody rents out their house as a vacation rental or their ADU as a vacation rental, is it then taken off the RENA numbers because it's not really providing permanent housing? It's more of like a hotel room?
It is not, because it hasn't, technically it's a use that could revert back to a full-time rent, a long-term rental for a resident. And I know there are a lot of communities that don't regulate it anywhere nearly as tightly as we do. We do not allow ADUs to be rented as without a use permit. And part of the when would it be appropriate is the vacation rental discussion, right? That is the discussion that this body will be deliberating on. But unless it's actually taken, the elements that make it a residence, so the kitchen, the bathroom, and the sleeping area, that is the definition of a dwelling unit. What if it's used for some period of time as a vacation rental, it does not get taken off of the RENA numbers, just like if there's something that was built or is being used as a vacation rental and they want to convert it back. We don't subtract and add in at that level.
Okay.
It is part of the permanent housing stock, and so that's how the state looks at it from those numbers. But I do know that we actually also do, for instance, we actually have someone who's contacted us since COVID-19 started who she just has a room, but it sounds like it may have a small kitchenette or something in it, and she's interested in turning it into a junior accessory dwelling unit or something like that. So, things happen both ways for that.
Yeah. Is it possible when we're having this discussion just to have a number of the rental units, and then we could kind of I'm just curious about like how much housing is being built versus then how much of it's being converted into vacation rentals? Are we like,
right, so you're asking for the number of vacation rentals that the city currently has? Yes, we can certainly get that. We do have the monitoring host compliance consultant that monitors which we started last year, and they did a good job of tracking down. And Ellen's been working with them now over the last couple of months to track vacation rentals.
And then my other comment or just question, is it possible for the city to be more proactive in creating discussions with the developers or different types of housing consortiums? Because it seems like to me, Sebastopol has a lot of areas for urban infill that could be used not only for our community vitality, but also to broaden our housing base. But it seems that in order to get a diversity of income level and housing, you have to advocate for that, because developers aren't naturally don't seem to naturally want to develop that. So for instance, in San Francisco, there's senior housing for LGBTQ seniors that I think, that's great. And maybe we could do some urban, there's lots of already co-housing. There's, I think, 2 or 3 co-housing developments in Sebastopol. Would it be possible to talk to the residents that live there to see if we could build more co-housing in Sebastopol? I guess what I'm asking is there a way to see what's possible out there in order to get more, or is there a way to work with the banks to allow more housing for teachers or something? You know what I mean? Are there creative solutions and outreach to get more housing that also can accommodate different people of different economic means?
Sure. I'm not sure I can answer that question all in one, but so I do know that the mayor has done a housing sites tour, one of his Sebastopol walks. That's more just community members. One of the things that we just submitted for there's sort of 2 state planning grants out there right now. The first one I mentioned was the Senate Bill 2, so SB2 is what it's called, planning grant. That's the one we're going to be using for the vacation rental, the electronic permitting, and the objective design standard updates. There was another grant that was announced, and I guess the original deadline was July 1st. I submitted it on July 1st, even though I heard on July 1st that it was extended until January of 2021. I said, no, I'm done with the application. We're submitting it today. The projects for that one, it's a crazy world. Some, because the state can extend some deadlines, but others they can't because it's in the state law that was passed. So you never know. But at any rate, the projects we're looking at for that are, one of them is the vehicle mile traveled analysis that went into effect July 1st. Right now, we're doing it on a case-by-case basis, and you'll see that as projects come to you. Our first one will be Benedetti Tires proposing a car wash, and we're just finishing the VMT analysis for that. So that'll be coming to you in the next couple of months. But we need to, as a community, set what our standard thresholds are. And so that's one of the projects that I applied for funding for that, knowing that there's probably not going to be a lot of general funds to support that kind of a thing. The other thing that I submitted for was to do some work on housing sites. We will have a housing element update coming up sooner than you'd think. It's due to the state, I believe, in January 2023, which seems like a long way but it's not actually. So I did submit for potentially doing some site analysis to look at potential sites for housing that we may need. It looks like our arena number will probably be, well, they've assigned for the entire Bay Area, and the entire Bay Area's number went up about 230% or so over last time. That was not unexpected. The numbers were somewhat low last time, and we had heard there are places in Southern California that got 300% more than they had previously. So again, we don't run our lives by what that target is, but it is, there are certainly state laws and things like that that we need to look at those as targets. Our housing element, and I'm sorry, to go on for this, but it's a little bit detailed. Our housing element requires us to identify sites where that housing could be accommodated. So I did submit as part of the LEAP, the state planning, this new state planning grant, for doing some looking at potentially sites, but also to look at if we have sites that we really have identified that would be great for housing, to try to have some conversations with developers and do some outreach for that. So Commissioner Haug, I think that sort of answers that question. We don't have any other specific, talking to people who are doing HOCO housing and things like that. I do have conversations with Burbank Housing and some of the other nonprofits on a regular basis, the Housing Land Trust, as well, in terms of things that we could be doing. But we also do have a housing subcommittee, which if you're interested, right now that's a council subcommittee, but that may be something that could have a planning commission liaison as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like, yeah, that there's opportunity out there, but it seems, obviously we're in a global pandemic, but eventually we'll come out of the pandemic and we'll still need housing. The need for housing is not going to subside, I don't think,
Right, and we do actually, just to update the commission on various applications, we do have the Huntley Square, the 10-unit development has submitted their formal application. And Alan, I know it was incomplete to you. Have they resubmitted yet? Or are we waiting on that?
Not yet. It looks like they're still working on addressing the comments.
Okay. And then the Woodmark has submitted, that's the 84 unit of 100% affordable on Bodega Avenue on the west side. They have resubmitted. Alan is completing the review. They still have some, we feel they still have some pretty significant issues with the site to resolve. So we'll be working with them on that. And then I know City Ventures, which is the 100 or so units on the north side of town, are doing some due diligence work right now. So there are a few sort of larger projects. Whether or not they all move forward or not, obviously I don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah.
But once you get the formal submittal like the Huntley Square, that is a good indication, because that does take quite a bit of effort to put those together.
Thank you.
Also, should be an item for communications in the agenda, and also part of the planning director's report. Katie sent out a email regarding a group called Co-Mission, which is Sebastopol brought in, a part of the Sebastopol Vital project. And I just wanted to, I've been working on that committee, and I wanted to just bring some information in there. Basically, if you go to that site, there's a link on the email that was sent, and basically promoting, trying to support businesses reopening in a lot of different fashion, and doing it kind of in a safe way. So we came up with a Sip, Shop, Savor Sebastopol Safely, and trying to do is just promote some activity around the businesses. There's a kind of an activity list that people can do, and it's just basically to get people out, read a book, go for a bike ride, those types of things, and then they can check that off, and then they enter in for a raffle. The organizations that are involved with this project is Chamber of Commerce Sebastopol, Downtown Association, the Barlow, Sonoma West Times and News, and local Rotary clubs, and some of the others. So the main, what can we do, others can do besides, do some of the activities, is if I'm asked if you guys can, if you're on any of the social media, just put the word out and relay this to other individuals. We're just trying to kind of start to get, promotion of Sebastopol. We're trying to help businesses as much as we can in different ways. And I know a lot of it is, they open and now they have to close. So there, a lot of them are kind of struggling at this point, but we're trying to come up with different ideas to do that. The Asphalt Paving project also did a survey you may have heard about, where they surveyed businesses, and then coming up, they're going to do a survey for residents and trying to get kind of some of their feedback on there. Some of the things we also talked about are things such as helping, say, senior members of our community that may be not as technical savvy, and how we can maybe be able to connect them with maybe even high school class, or to help them to get items that they need to buy or order, those kinds of things. So anyway, just encourage you to check it out, forward it to your social media pages, and just kind of support and be aware of it for our business sakes.
Are you taking some questions,
Yeah.
Everett?
Sure.
Okay. I have heard some discussion about, first of all, I know it'd probably be difficult to know, but I know that Commission was doing some surveys of the businesses. And my concern is, how do we attract, or what are the limitations that have been expressed about having more diversity in business owners?
I think at this point, we're just trying to keep the businesses that are here. And I'm sure that before this pandemic is certainly something that was brought up. I think there's also, because I think that, the comments made, one of the public comments made is about diversity in our community. And, there isn't a lot to offer as far as bringing other diverse groups into the community. It used to be, growing up, you had, Fiesta Market where a lot of people shopped, and there's a lot of different events going on in restaurants and so forth, but there isn't as much. So, those certainly areas that need to be looked at, I think, in the future. And it would be, helpful to, offer, products or services or events even that may attract a different group to be all, better inclusive.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chair Connect,
Good.
I wanted to make a quick notice about social media use. I think that it's a really good campaign. My one concern is mostly surrounding sort of the central use of Facebook, and I think this maybe just plays into a bit more about the city's communications overall. I think that Facebook is very effective, but it also will hit on one demographic more so than maybe others. And I think the city's Twitter account, it didn't really make any mention of this campaign. And just the city's Twitter account in general, I think it's worth noting, they may maybe 1 or 2 tweets a month. And there's nothing on Instagram or, heaven forbid, TikTok or anything like that that might be to the younger generation. So I think that's something to think about, is if we want a diversity of age and opinion, that maybe just more online platforms than just Facebook could be helpful.
Well, I'm very glad you brought that up, because I think we could, your name was brought up, well, by me, as far as someone that could participate and help us with those types of things, because I think that's a demographic that we're missing, and it would be helpful. So maybe that's one of the things you and I can maybe discuss for a future time. And because I think you have some good comments, and we're kind of limited to what we're using, and most of the stuff is like, what happened to this or that? Well, that's gone. People don't use that anymore, and so we're just, I'm a few years behind, I think, sometimes, but yeah. But I think I still have CDs. Is that still the market now for music? So it would be good, and thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, I look forward to talking to you about it more.
Okay, if there's nothing else, I appreciate everyone's time, and I know this is kind of challenging sometimes to have these meetings, and it's always better in person, but appreciate everybody's participation, and that we're able to continue moving forward. And Katie, thank you for all the work that you do behind the scenes for our meetings and to keep our city going. So thank you for that, and Alan as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then
Here,
next
here.
scheduled meeting is, are we scheduled for anything coming up?
I believe you and I have a chair director meeting tomorrow morning. So right now, please reserve the second meeting on your schedule. I am working with the development impact fee to make sure we have all the information for that discussion. That will either be the last meeting in July or the first meeting in August, depending on when we get that information turned around.
Okay.
And we did have a little sort of, I think we've had a little bit of a slowing in use permit applications and things like that with the business climate right now. So we don't have any pending development applications at this point that are ready for review. So.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much again. And I adjourn this meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it is good to see everyone's face.
Yeah.
It is.
Except mine.
Oh, yeah. But you stay safe, Linda. So you're in the
Well, you
trenches.
know what? I got my hair cut finally after all this time.